What we're going to do here is take a look at creative cropping within Pictures-to-Exe. I'm going to crop an image into 5 equal pieces vertically. So each of the pieces will be 20% of the original. In the interests of keeping the video as short as possible, I'm limiting this technique to 5 20% pieces, but we can actually go down to pieces much smaller, either horizontal or vertical. And we do cover this topic in the advanced animation set of videos. So let me give you a brief idea of what we're going to do here with our 5 vertical pieces. In this case the image is monochrome, but I've added colour too. But the image will return to monochrome as it reaches the end of the animation. Now I've got a chart which will help us to cut this image up into its 20% sections. So just before we start in the Objects and Animation screen, let me take you into Photoshop and I'll show you the chart, which I will include so you can refer to it if you wish. It looks more complicated than it actually is when it first opens up. If I can just draw your attention to the left hand side, if we opened up a full image into Pictures-to-Exe, but we only wanted to use 20%, and if we're going to start on the left hand side, then an 80% crop from the right will give us the piece we need. But of course, as we move down from left to right, then the crop from the right now needs to be 60%, but it also needs to be 20% from this end, and you can see the logic all the way through. So what we're going to do is to create 5 copies of one image, and we're going to crop them with the values you can see here. Coming back into Pictures-to-Exe, we'll use this picture, but it doesn't really matter which one we use. Let's go to the Objects and Animation screen, and straight away I need a few more copies of this. So I'm going to use copy and paste here. Control C will copy that image, but if I hit Control V now, it pastes it back as a child of the parent. Don't want to do that, so I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. Click in the grey area and then Control V. Click in the white area to lose the bounding box and Control V, and so on until you've got 5 copies. And it wouldn't be a bad idea if we went to the properties here and rename these. So let's just name them 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 from the left to the right. Just makes it a bit easy for us to identify them, if I get the numbers right, of course. Okay, let's start with piece number 1. All we need at the moment is the first keyframe. I need to go to my image crop here, and remember the first crop was 80% from the right, so I can just dial that in, and there's the first piece. The first thing you'll notice though, although this piece needs to be right up here, you can see the cloud, Pictures-to-Exe now sees this as an individual image and puts it in the center, which it does with every single image we import or crop. We need to move this to the left. Now how far do we need to move it? Well, if we go to the animation here and we click and drag and get close, there's a clue, -80, exactly the same as we used in the crop. Now we can move on to the next one. Selecting the next one, back to the properties, from memory, if I go to my crop options, now this one needs to be cropped 60% from the right, but 20% from the left. And there's our next piece. Now you can do this all at the end, or you can do what I'm doing and go straight to the animation and of course the next piece needs to be -40. And you can see the image coming together already. The next one is quite an easy one, because when we go back to the properties and we go to the image crop, this is in the center, so this is 40 left and 40 right, and we don't have to move it because it's already nicely in the middle, which takes us to number 4. Now with number 4, of course, we're moving the other side of the center, so number 4 needs to be 20% from the right and 60% from the left. So 60% from the left and 20% from the right. And of course, if we go straight to the animation, we need to move this right to that sort of position and get it perfect. It's 40 because we're now working to the right and we need a positive figure rather than a negative. And finally, the last one, which is again pretty easy to do, image crop, and now of course we need the 80% solely from the left. But when we go to the animation, then what we need here is 80 there. There's the image fully back into one piece, and we've got the image cropped in our 5 20% sections. I'm going to select all 5 sections with shift click, and I need to have a keyframe to help me to build the animation. The keyframe I want here needs to be a cloned keyframe, so I'm going to select the top number 1 image first and Alt Insert, then I can come down to the next one and so on all the way down, and then I can line them up. We're probably going to need 4 or 5 seconds to do this, but as you probably know, it's not cast in stone. We can always change this a little bit later. So there we've got the keyframes that control the start of the animation. Here we have the keyframes that control the end, and at the end of the animation we need the image fully on screen, and of course we won't see none of those lines in place when we see it for real. So let me reselect these just for a moment. Now let me create a little more room here. We need room for what we're doing, but we also need to see everything up here. If we just wanted to have these pieces coming in from the left, like my demonstration a few moments ago, we can select the first of these keyframes and we could drag them to somewhere like that, and there we have it. Of course, we would need to consider the speed options as well, and in this case, because we're starting the animation within the fade on screen, I'd be selecting the slow down option. Now we've done all of the hard work. All we need to do now is to decide really on the type of animation we want. Now we've got all of them sliding off to the left. Maybe we could take a look at a rotation as well and see how that looks. Most of these ideas are doing, I think, much what I'm doing here, where we select an adjustment and we change it. I'm going for a negative now, and we just see the effect of what we're doing as it drops onto the screen. Well, I think we would all choose something slightly different, and there's nothing to stop me having these in place and just spinning round or dropping down from the top or coming up from the bottom. Maybe the first, third and the fifth could come from the top, and the second and the fourth could come from the bottom. There's all sorts of things you could try with this type of effect. Now let's go back to the first of our keyframes. Let's just assume we're going to stay with the 2 options we have. We've rotated a little bit and we've also panned. But we may want to experiment with a bit of zoom as well. So what it may be a good idea to do is to go to the modifier for the pan and choose slow down, Also for the zoom, in case we apply it. If we don't, no harm done, but we have done a little rotation, so we need to slow down that too. So I need to select each of these keyframes in turn, the first ones of course, and put the same speed values into the animation parameters. Now what I've done is to add the speed values to all 5 sections of the image, and I've added a little bit of a zoom. I've dropped the zoom down for all of the pieces, and if I press play you'll get an idea of just how that's going to work. Now at the moment of course I'm working with a full screen image, but we may not want to do that. So let's look at that by applying all 5 pieces to a frame. Coming down to the bottom right, I'm just going to click into the white area to lose all selections, right click and add a frame. Remember, a frame is just like an invisible hand or container which is going to hold all of the pieces. But I need to put the pieces into the frame in a parent and child fashion. To do that I just select them all once again, right click and cut them. Don't worry, they're not missing, just paste them back into the frame with a right click and a paste. So we have exactly the same animation, nothing's changed there, but now we've got the ability to change the whole thing with the frame. So let me select all of them and the frame, because what I'd like to do is to maybe have the frame bring in the size down to about 85. Let's have a look at that. 85 there, and we'll press play, and you can see what that does. It restricts the image to slightly smaller than the screen, and we could all decide of course to choose a slightly different enlargement. When I created this, it was for a camera club competition to enable us to show high scoring images again and have a nice way to bring them on screen. So with the frame I even dropped my image down a little bit to allow myself a little room for a bit of text there, which would give the author's name and the title of the image. But here we'll leave it in the center. We could have the image a little bit bigger, but it does give us the opportunity as well to maybe use the same image as a background. Now we can do that quite easily as well. If we just click into the background to lose the selections again, we can add an image, and what we'll do is we'll add exactly the same image. Creative cropping. There we have it. But this, if it's going to be a background, needs to be at the bottom of the stack. So either right click and choose order and use that option, but I quite like control page down because it's quick and easy. So I can just put that down at the bottom. I can add some blur. Let's make it a bit bigger. I can add some blur. I could drop the opacity. Could make it quite dark if I wanted to. And there we've got that background which just sits nicely in place. The one thing we can't do is to put an edge around this image, because remember, this image is made up of 5 sections. So if I put a border around these pieces, I'm going to have a border around all 5 sections. Clearly that's not correct. But if you did want to have the image come to a stop around there and have a nice thin line around the edge, well then all we need to do is to add yet another image, because it's not a problem to do this. So I'm going to go back to my frame here, because this next image I want it within the frame because I need it to be controlled at the same size. So if I right click the frame and choose add an image and pick the same image again, we don't appear to see anything at all at the moment because it's an identical image and it's sitting right on the top. Let me select the frame all the way down to 5. There we can see the frame keyframe, which is bringing us down to 87%. There's the image that's going to appear over the top of our image, and at the moment we can see it here. but we don't want it to appear until we get right down near these keyframes here. So at that point we really need the image I've just added to be completely transparent. That then very soon after that, I'm going to add another keyframe. I need it to be fully solid, and this layer of course needs to have properties, border 4 pixels. Let's come out of this and we'll have a look at this from the blank. Doesn't work too bad at all, does it? Now perhaps we're not seeing the effect at its best because we're coming to and from blank, so let me just drop an image to precede that one and an image to follow that one, and maybe we'll just take a look in the mini player at the effect we've just created with that creative cropping. Now if you don't like the effect you've created when we put the white line around the edge, then all you need to do really is to go back to your objects and animation screen, select all of the appropriate keyframes, because sometimes I found that if you select these two and just stagger them, something like that, then you just change very slightly the effect because you're bringing up the line a little bit sooner or a little bit later. But just vary the position of these two, and of course you could have them wider apart if that's what you wanted, and of course we've got the opportunity to adjust the border. If white is a little bit too bright, we can go to a mid-tone grey. Now let's assume that I'm going to make a slide style of this so I can use it again. The one thing I've got to make sure is I've got the objects chosen correctly. So let's go to the bottom, and number 5. Number 5 is listed as number 1. Number 4 is 1, 3 is 1, 2 is 1, 1 is 1. But of course that's got to be 1 as well, isn't it? So if you tick the box and it comes up as number 2, change it to number 1, because it's all the same image, and in fact even our background needs to be number 1. Now this means that when we apply this particular slide style, the style will be added to whatever image it's applied to. There's nothing within the slide style like the background, for example, because that's pulled from the image we're applying the slide style to. Let me just finish this off by coming back to the main screen, go to my slide styles, tools, create the style. I'll use creative cropping as the category, and I'll abbreviate the next thing, CC001, let's call it. And you'll notice that the slide count here is saying 1, which is correct of course, and I can click to create. Because once we actually create this and we create the slide style, the very first thing we're going to probably want to do is just try it on a few images just to see how it looks when they go from one to the other, in case we want to string a few of these together. So I'll just select those 4, go to my slide style, go to my creative cropping and apply it. Looks good so far. I'll start from the rock face here, and we'll just make sure that 1 or 2 of these work okay. We do have one more opportunity here, which I'll come to in a few seconds. We'll just watch 2 or 3 of these. We could have the image, once it's on screen and viewed for a little while, we could have the image moving off to the right. It's an option that we can try. Let me stop at this point. We'll go back into the objects and animation screen. There's a couple of things we can do. The first thing is we could, at the first keyframe here, we could change all of the colors of the images like I did in my demo. And to do that, I used the color correction. So I added a filter, I used coloration, I chose red for the first one. With the second one, I chose green and blue. But as you can see, we've run out of colors. Well, not really. Number 4, add a filter, coloration. I'll go back to my red, but I'll click the red panel and we'll choose something a little different. Let's have a mauve this time, which leaves us something we need to pick differently for number 5. So let's add a filter. Colorization, let's go to the green, click the green, and we'll just change that maybe to a pale blue. And there's the change. Now, if we select the frame and all of the images down to 5, I'm not too concerned with any of these here, it's the frame itself. So the frame is okay at 87%, so we could move this down here because the images are, or the sections are on screen at the 5-second point. So if we want to go to say something like 10, 11 to 15, that's 4 seconds off. Let's go to 10. I'm going to place this at 10 seconds. So what we're effectively saying is all the while these images come on screen, this keyframe can control the percentage to 87%. But between this keyframe and this keyframe, which I'm about to insert, we can remove everything in one go. Because we can say, well, let's pan it off to the right, let's give it a bit of rotation, let's zoom it maybe down. Well, let's just give that one final viewing because we've changed the color as well now. And you can see we can make derivatives of our first animated effect with the creative cropping quite quickly and easily. Once we've viewed it, that slides one way and it should work pretty well because everything else comes in from the left hand side. There we have creative cropping. And of course it does make some sense that if we've made changes here and applied the color and a different way for the image to leave the screen, that we create a slide style for that too, which is what I've done, and I've applied it to these images. So to finish this video, we'll just have a little demo, but you will have both of these slide styles which you can apply to your own images. I think it looks quite nice going off to the right because it just has a certain symmetry with the image coming on from the left. And it works quite well with black and whites because the next image was the one I used as a demo at the start. There we have creative cropping.